welcome to our Wednesday night class for this week. Jim Morgan, Aaron Tremblay here. We appreciate you joining us this week as we do every week. It's encouraging to us to get feedback from you. It's encouraging to us to be able to see that so many of you are watching and engaging. So we want to continue our study on the life of Joseph from Genesis, and this week we're going to be in chapter 46. I'll just put a reminder out there again. I'll have the email up here, and if you have a question or a comment or an idea for maybe a future class that we could do together, I encourage you to go ahead and share that with us.
And if you wanted to share this with your friends, if you think they might be interested in viewing these classes, if they enjoy studying the Bible, just send a message along to them. Tell them you need to watch this. We'd appreciate that as well.
Absolutely. So let's dive right in here to chapter 46. We just finished 45, and as we finish 45, Jacob finally believes that Joseph's alive, and so he's packing up his stuff. He's getting ready to head out of Canaan to go see it for himself. You can imagine how elated he is at the thought of being able to see his long-lost son again.
You have to wonder how much stuff he actually packed up once they told him. Joseph said he'd give us all new stuff. Who needs this?
You would think. But in 46, here's what it says. So Israel took his journey with all that he had, and came to Beersheba and offered sacrifices to the God of his father Isaac. Now there's a couple big things here in this verse. One, Jacob goes to Beersheba. Beersheba is kind of like the last stop before the wilderness between Canaan and Egypt. So why is Beersheba significant? Well, once you get past Beersheba, there's really no turning back. You've now fully committed to this journey, and you can't just say, you know what, I was kind of comfortable at home. I think I'm going to head back now.
Yeah.
Because you'll be stuck out in the middle of the desert, and we know their provisions are some limited. So Beersheba bears a significance for that reason, and it also seems to be the final home that Isaac had, based on our earlier chapters from Genesis in chapter 37 and 35, kind of mention that. But I do think it's significant. It's going to be mentioned more than once that he takes this journey with all that he had. He was told to bring nothing, but he takes everything. And I think, as you've commented about Jacob's
Mental state?
Yeah, and his concern over stuff, he's like, what do you mean leave my stuff? You know, and so he packs up what he has. The flocks and the herds are going to play a big role later on. But nonetheless, Jacob takes what he has, he goes to Beersheba, and he does something that I think is really positive in verse 2 here. He takes some time once he reaches Beersheba, and in verse 1, and he offers sacrifices to God. Now, the last time I can think of that Jacob left Canaan was when Esau got really mad at him, and he ran out of town. But you remember he went to Bethel. I think it was called Luz at the time, L-U-Z, or Luz. And that's the time he has the vision of the ladder, ascending and descending into heaven. And God gives him a vision then. And so Jacob's getting ready to leave the Canaan again. And now he consults God, offers a sacrifice. He wants divine permission. He wants divine confirmation of his decision to leave, because we brought this up last week. Abraham left Canaan and went to Egypt. Didn't go well. Isaac tried. He did leave Canaan and he tried to go to Egypt, but God stopped him and said, I don't want you to go there. So it makes sense that Jacob, when he's getting ready to leave Canaan, says, you know what, I'm going to wait and I'm going to consult God and get confirmation this is what God wants me to do.
Yeah. And you were right. I checked back in chapter 26. The last place that we have Isaac being was Beersheba. And it's interesting because it says, verse 23, from there he went up to Beersheba. That night the Lord appeared to him and said, I am the God of your father Abraham. Do not be afraid, for I am with you. I'll bless you and will increase the number of your descendants for the sake of my servant Abraham. And Isaac built an altar there and called on the name of the Lord. So the idea is that there was a promise made here that, yes, you're going to become a great nation. Also interesting is it says, I am the God of your father Abraham. Back over here, it says, the God of your father Isaac. It's as if, Isaac was last here. So Abraham really doesn't matter at this point. Now it's the promise that was made to Isaac. And so Jacob wants to stop, reaffirm the promise, see if God's going to say anything to him, because he was told not to go to Egypt. Is Jacob going to be told not to go to Egypt as well? So I think he's giving every opportunity here. If God doesn't want him to go down, then he's going to give him every opportunity to say no.
Just like he stopped Isaac, he'll stop Jacob.
Yeah.
And tell him he doesn't want him to go.
And so Beersheba is critical.
Oh, it plays a huge significance here. And I do think the changing of title is important too. It's not that there's different gods. The God of Abraham is not a different God than the God of Isaac, than the God of Jacob.
Right.
But God was first the God of Abraham because Abraham was the first patriarch. Then from Abraham, now we have Isaac. So God became the God of Isaac, and then he became the God of Jacob. So, but all the same God. But as the promise goes, God goes with it, maybe as a way to,
Because in a couple of verses here, he's going to reaffirm the promise he made to Abraham and to Isaac. It's now going to be confirmed to Jacob. You will be a great nation.
And God's trying to reassure him, I'm going to fulfill this through you in Egypt. Yeah, exactly. Verse 2 says, and God spoke to Israel. Now you're going to notice as we're moving through this chapter, it's happened several times throughout the narrative of Joseph, but Jacob's going to be referred to as Israel. And part of the reason I think that's done in this particular chapter is because we're showing the movement and the birth of the nation of Israel.
Yeah.
It's not just Jacob anymore. This is something that bears significance on the future of the nation. And so that's why I think this other name is used.
And in verse 2, it's obviously theological, because it says, and God spoke to Israel in a vision at night and said, Jacob, Jacob.
Correct.
So the emphasis here on that God is still calling him Jacob, but he's speaking to Israel, which again could be he's speaking to the people who are going to become Israel. When Moses writes this, God is speaking to these people.
Jacob, Jacob, he said, here I am. Then he said, I am God, the God of your father. Do not be afraid to go down to Egypt, for there I will make you into a great nation. I myself will go down with you to Egypt, and I will also bring you up again, and Joseph's hand shall close your eyes. So again, in God's statement to Jacob here, there's several important things I think that are worth our note. Number one, he tells him, don't be afraid to go down. I do think Jacob had some reservations about going down.
Well, he'd heard that story from his daddy, I suspect.
That's right. And so God is trying to deal with those reservations that Jacob has. And let's face it, even if I told you tomorrow, Jim, you should move to Massachusetts, and I said, pack up all your stuff, everything you own, and move your family there, I'm sure you would have some reservations.
Some severe reservations.
But just put yourself in
My
Jacob's...
Crimson Tide stuff would not go over well there.
Put yourself in Jacob's shoes. This is a significant transition that he's making with his entire family, not just one person traveling. It used to just be his sons traveling. Now it's everybody. We're all in here. And so you can understand him having some concerns, and so God's trying to alleviate those and tells him, don't be afraid.
Yeah, and there's another factor that goes into that. Jacob knows, because he told it back at the last of verse 45, I will go and see him before I die. And then when he meets Joseph a little bit later, he says, now I can die. He knows he's going to die in Egypt. And it's very important that you be buried with your fathers in your native land. And so this would be another concern. If I go down there and I die, what's going to happen to me? And that there would be some hesitation there.
It's very true. And I mean, he says, for I will make you into a great nation. So automatically, for me at least, when I read, I will make you into a great nation, and I hear God making mention of being the God of Jacob's father, and he could say fathers, meaning all the way back to Abraham. But when he says, I'll make you into a great nation, that takes me back to Genesis 12, when God uses that exact same phrasing in his promise to Abraham. And so I see this tying those things together and deliberately trying to bring our mind as the readers back to that event.
And I believe, I could be wrong about this, but it seems like that when Abraham is told, I'll make you into a great nation, the next thing that happens is they go to Egypt. Not supposed to this time. But now Jacob is told, it's okay, this time you go to Egypt, and I will make you a great nation there.
That's right.
So yeah, it's tying into history.
And God, to your point in verse 4, Now God's saying, I'm going to go with you when you
Yeah.
go. Last time it was, I'm just going to go to Egypt because I'm hungry with Abraham.
Mhm.
And then you get all these problems. And now God says, when you go, I will go with you.
And that was the problem, apparently, because Abraham felt that when he went to Egypt, God's not going to go with him.
Mhm.
Because he says, when we get down there, these people don't fear God, and God won't be able to protect us, so you're going to have to lie to protect me. There was that idea of territoriality.
Yes.
That once you cross the border, God has to stay on this side.
Mhm.
And so, the idea I will go down with you is something that's new in this.
Mhm.
And God gives him permission, and everything's going to be fine.
That's right. And it also, again, that God says, I'm going to go with you to Egypt, that he's leaving, Jacob and all of God's people are leaving Canaan to go into Egypt, is also pointing back to what God had told to Abraham. Not necessarily in chapter 12, but more towards chapter 15 when he tells him, these people, your people, are going to have to spend 400 years
Mhm.
in this time of slavery
Yeah.
In a nation, in a foreign land, right? So
Yep.
now they're all moving into a foreign land. So this is also part of the promise
Mhm.
that God made.
And I think in verse 4, we've got that double again, something for this time, but also something for those people that Moses is leading out. Because he says, I will go down to Egypt with you, and I will surely bring you back again.
Mhm.
Well, Jacob's going to die in Egypt. He's not going to be brought back again, except that they're going to bring him back and bury
His
him.
body, yeah.
But I think this is a promise also to the people of Israel. Remember, God said he would bring Israel out of Egypt.
Mhm.
And so it's a double-sided thing. Yet don't worry about it. You'll be buried with your fathers. And I will bring y'all, if there's only a good Southern translation, I will bring y'all out of the land of Egypt.
Right.
Because when you went down, I went with you, I'll bring you back out.
And it's important for God to make that clear. I think there's a reason why he tells Abraham. I think there's a reason why he's telling Jacob here that they'll be brought out again. Because when you're going through persecution or hardship, God's always specific with his people. He tells Abraham it's going to be 400 years. He tells his people when they go into Babylon it's going to be 70 years.
Mhm.
He's specific because when you're going through hardship and difficulty, I don't know if it's necessarily easier, but knowing that God has an intention to bring it to an end and restore you
Mhm.
is something I think that's pretty significant. At Joseph's hand shall close your eyes. Yeah, this is good too. It's important.
Yeah, because again, he's going to die down there, but don't worry, you will be buried with your people.
And you'll be buried with your people, and your beloved son, your
Yeah.
favorite son, will be with you.
The one
And
you
will be the
thought was
one to close
dead
your eyes.
will be the one with you when you die.
That's right. And so it's all comfort and reassurance. That's what God's trying to give Jacob. So verse 5 says, Then Jacob set out from Beersheba. The sons of Israel carried Jacob their father, their little ones, and their wives in the wagons that Pharaoh had sent to carry him. They also took their livestock and their goods, which they had gained in the land of Canaan, and came into Egypt, Jacob and all of his offspring with him. Again, I think there's a couple things worth noting here. They use the wagons that Pharaoh sent out for them. They bring their livestock and their goods. Now, it told us already back in verse 1 that Jacob leaves with all he had. He doesn't leave anything behind. I think there's kind of an explanation here for that goes a little bit beyond just Jacob maybe trying to have a backup plan.
Mm-hmm.
If it doesn't work out for me in Egypt, at least I didn't lose anything by leaving my stuff. I've still got my stuff. But it says specifically the livestock and their goods that they had gained in the land of Canaan. If you remember, when Jacob runs into Esau, finally, and their paths cross after everything that had happened, he kind of, whether we want to say he had to or not, he kind of buys his way out of his problem with Esau and has to rebuild a little bit after that. And so these were the things that God had blessed Jacob with. The way that God had shown he was with Jacob in Canaan was by the attaining of these things,
Mm-hmm.
where he had established himself. So maybe if we want to give Jacob a big benefit of the doubt, maybe he's trying to bring with him the things that God had provided him and didn't want to leave those things behind. But the livestock is critical because that helps Joseph make an important point to Pharaoh later on.
About what land they're going to get. We want to keep them away from the Egyptians.
That's right. We're not just Hebrews, we're shepherds.
Yeah. But on the other side of that, Jacob has always tried to have a plan B.
Yes.
When he when he receives that vision from God, that night that he's sleeping there, he says, okay, if you'll do all this for me, then, here's what's going to go on. But what I'm thinking of is when he gets back and God tells him to clear all of the idols out of the camp. Now, first of all, it's interesting. He's got idols. Okay, in spite of everything, God has to tell him, now, I want all the idols out of the camp. And apparently there's a pretty fair number of them.
Oh, yeah.
But he takes them and he buries them under the oak at Shechem.
Mm-hmm.
Now, why would he do that? So that just in case he can go back and find them
again. Yeah.
So it would not be unusual for Jacob to not trust God enough that he's just going to leave everything.
Oh yeah.
He's going to take backup plan with him, and that's just Jacob being Jacob.
And even at Bethel, he tells God, "I'll make this place the place that you're worshiped." Well, God didn't ask for any of that.
Mm-hmm.
And Bethel later on becomes a problem of being a place that God's worshipped when he doesn't want to be, or when gods are worshipped, where gods are worshipped there. But so that's significant here. Into the land of Canaan, they come into Egypt, and here again, I think the language is important and repetition is important. Jacob, and it doesn't just say and his family, it says his offspring with him, his sons and his sons' sons with him, his daughters and his sons' daughters, all his offspring he brought with him into Egypt. Well, again, you go back to Genesis in 12 and 13 and 15 where these promises are made. It's always referring to the offspring of Abraham will be like the sands of the seashore.
It's a very important word.
And so here we have great nation points us back to the promise to Abraham. Offspring points us back to the promise of Abraham.
Yeah.
And the fact that they're going to a foreign nation, which God told them they were going to have to do, points us back to Abraham. So even though Abraham's name is not even mentioned here, and I don't even know that the promise is specifically mentioned here per se, but lots of indications that remind us and point us back to that promise.
Yeah, I will make you a great nation. That's clearly Abraham.
Yeah.
So, Abraham, as Paul reminds us later in the New Testament, Abraham is sort of the underlying foundation of everything that's going to happen from here on out.
Mm-hmm.
This is the promise made to Abraham. God said it would be his seed. Abraham is our father. Abraham, pays tithes to Melchizedek, therefore there's a priesthood. Abraham is the underpinnings for pretty much everything that goes on.
Yeah, and that's and so one of your earlier points, I think it's helpful to repeat. The reason that God says, "I'm going to take care of you, Isaac," is because I made a promise to Abraham.
Yeah.
The reason that God's going to take care of Jacob is not because God necessarily chose Jacob. Jacob wasn't supposed to be the one; it was supposed to be Esau. But God says, because of the promise I made to Abraham, because of the promise I made to Isaac, now I'm going to stick with you as the recipient of that promise. But it all, again, goes back to that promise made to Abraham.
Yeah. And switching out the blessing on the firstborn is apparently going to become a family tradition here.
That's right.
Because Jacob's
Very
going to do it
shortly.
again.
That's right. So now we get to verse 8 and following. And what we have here, it tells us of all these offspring that are making this transition from Canaan to Egypt. And the text goes into a specific listing of those offspring that go with Abraham, now I'm thinking about Abraham, that go with Jacob into Egypt. So as you look through these names, you'll note several significant things. There are sons and daughters of Jacob that are mentioned. There are sons and daughters of Jacob's sons that are mentioned. And also you might note the ordering of the wives here. I guess in a technical way it's correct that Leah would be first because she was Jacob's first wife, followed by her, what's the word I want to use? Handmaiden? Her...
Handmaid.
Yeah, secondary wife through Leah. It was a wife given to Leah or a handmaiden given to Leah, and then Rachel. And we know this wouldn't be Jacob's choice of ordering or significance because Jacob's two sons he loves the most come directly from Rachel, who he was trying to actually marry when he ended up marrying Leah first because of Laban and his dishonesty. So as you look at this list, I guess maybe the most significant thing we can mention without having to belabor through all of these names is that the count comes to 70, and that seems to be mentioned at least specifically once. If you literally sit there and count it, it comes out to 70. 33 is a number mentioned in 14, 17 is 16 persons, 22 is 14, and the last one is 7 in 25. So 70 people come out of Canaan, go into Egypt.
And one thing I think is interesting when you look at this list, you realize that if Jacob would have been asked, he would have told you it's the descendants of Joseph and Benjamin that are going to be important. And it's not.
Mhm.
It's Leah's kid, Judah.
Mhm.
That's the one through whom all the important stuff is going to be done. So the one that he didn't even want is the one that God is going to use to bring about his final plan that's going to lead to Jesus.
And it seems at some point, and maybe it's because of the role he finds out that Judah plays in this whole story once he has a change of heart.
Mm-hmm.
But in Jacob's blessing, he gives basically the scepter of rulership to Judah as opposed to Reuben.
Which I think is a point of inspiration.
Mhm.
God makes sure the proper child gets blessed.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you know, he's got pretty good reason because Reuben and Simeon, man, they have done messed up.
Yeah.
So, you know, it's going to fall to, and then Levi, of course, but Levi, they've all messed up. So Judah, but God finds a way to make his purposes work, and it's the one who was not loved who is going to accomplish the great things.
That's right. A couple other significant things. This to me kind of stands out. Benjamin, when we get to Benjamin's children, his descendants, a lot of times I know when I was raised learning the story of Joseph and Benjamin, I always picture Benjamin being like 10 years old when he comes to Egypt.
I noticed that too.
And so I just wanted to say, when you look at this list, when you get to the sons of Benjamin, Benjamin has 10 sons. I mean, so he could have been 10 years old.
Yeah, Joseph has 2.
Right. So I think it's significant. Sometimes, I don't know, I don't think anybody ever told me he was, I just somehow got that in my head. But clearly with that.
It makes for a better story.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm with you. I had always thought, well, you know, Benjamin was just a little kid. No, but what's really nauseating about that is that here's Benjamin old enough to have 10 children. I'll trust your count on that. But to have 10 children, and Jacob still treating him as the spoiled child. No, you can't go down there because, you know, you got to stay here with me.
Mm-hmm.
So it just goes to show that, yeah, he's been playing favorites now for a long time.
Yeah, and to it, like you said, I think it's significant to adults, not just children.
Yeah.
You know, and Reuben, when I read the list of names that are mentioned for him, he had 4 sons. I wonder which 2 he offered to get rid of. You know, that's kind of wonder about that too. But anyway,
Yeah.
so I
Good
think
point.
those are just a couple of. It probably was the youngest 2 because the older ones are the important ones, right?
Mhm.
In terms of lineage and those kind of things. But so that point with Benjamin, I think, is good. And also, just as you go through the list, like I said, you'll see Joseph and his sons are mentioned. And remember, Joseph's descendants are. Joseph married an Egyptian, and wasn't necessarily his choice. He was put into slavery, and Pharaoh actually arranges that marriage, so I don't know how much say-so he really had in that. But his sons become 2 of the largest tribes in Israel once they go in and are assigned their land after they get into the promised land. So they play a significant role.
Yeah, and Ephraim is one of his descendants is going to be Joshua.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and there's very few people in the Bible apart from Jesus and Abraham, I guess, that are more important than Joshua.
Absolutely.
To the point where God names his son after him.
Yeah.
You know, Jesus is Greek for Joshua.
Mm-hmm.
So, but yeah, so, you know, Ephraim and Manasseh are both going to do well. Now, they're both going to be among the tribes that go away.
Right.
But at this point, yeah, Ephraim especially is going to be really important. That's what Jacob tells him, you know, don't worry about it. Ephraim's going to be important. Manasseh's going to be important. But Ephraim, if you go over into Judges, Joshua and Judges, anytime that it says something about, you know, a particular part of Israel, most of the time it's going to be, and in the land of Ephraim,
Mm-hmm.
because that was Joshua. And, you know, and now the point in Judges is, if it's this bad in the homeland of Joshua,
It's bad.
what do you think it was like about in the rest of this place?
That's right. Because he's given an important promise too,
Yeah.
that people will be faithful even after his death.
And another just
Yeah.
interesting to me, verse 23, the son of Dan. That's it, just one,
Mm-hmm.
Hushim. So if you remember, Dan, they couldn't figure out exactly what to do when it comes to inheritance. And once they get into the promised land, he gets actually divided, you know, top and top.
Yeah.
So, you know, the idea that they're just out proliferating everywhere, well, Dan wasn't.
Mm-hmm.
He's only got one son. And so,
And we have some specific mentions here of people having sons with Canaanites, and it's earlier on in verse 10, Simeon, which knowing Simeon, I guess that doesn't really surprise.
So, all this talk about, well, pure Jews, or, pure, there's never been any such thing.
And the Bible's unapologetic, or maybe that's not the right way to say it, but it doesn't try and hide that. It just, boom, it puts it right in the text. And I think that brings up a really important theological point of Scripture, which is when we talk about the chosenness of God, we're not talking about the chosenness, the perfect, the least fractured, or the least, with the least imperfections or whatever else. I mean, God takes these people completely broken, and later on in the Bible, and I think it's in Numbers or Deuteronomy chapter 8, where he talks about, I didn't choose you because you were the biggest or the strongest, or, you know what I mean? So it's the grace of God that has to do with chosenness, not the greatness or the perfectness of the people he utilizes.
And Jesus is going to say that later, or Moses, it'll start, I can start all over again with you and produce new people. It's not because I got to have you guys. No,
that's right.
I can start over again with you. And Jesus says, if necessary, I can make people out of rocks to yell for me.
Yeah, that's right.
So, there's nothing to the idea that, God has to have this particular group. No, he doesn't.
And the fact that Jacob's still alive says God uses grace in his choosing of people.
Yeah.
So that's all important. So I think those are some keys that we want to give you in this section in 8 through 25. And maybe at another time we can do some more digging into some specifics there. You want to pick up at 26?
Okay. All those who went to Egypt with Jacob, those who were his direct descendants, not counting his sons' wives, numbered 66 persons. And with the 2 sons who had been born to Joseph in Egypt, the members of Jacob's family which went to Egypt were 70 in all. And we talked about this. You had 66, then 2 more are added. That's 68. Then Joseph is 69, but to get to the number 70, you have to add Jacob himself too. Mm-hmm. So not counting the wives, not counting, there's a lot of people who aren't counted here. But they got to the number 70 because all the way through the Bible, the number 70 is going to be a very important, significant religious number.
Correct.
And that goes all the way through Revelation. The number just stays at 70. That was one thing that was special about the Septuagint. Mm-hmm. It's the translation of the 70.
Correct.
So 70 years of exile, just all mm-hmm. sorts of things that go on with that number. So it was important that we realized that there were 70 of them that went mm-hmm. down into Egypt.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. You're going to keep going in 28?
Now, Jacob sent Judah ahead of him to Joseph to get directions to Goshen. A man who asked directions. This is biblical. This is a miracle.
Now, here's the point I want to make here. Why do you think Jacob chooses Judah? Why do you think it's Judah that goes? I think it has to do with Judah's the one who has made this possible. Mm-hmm. Judah's the one who gives the speech. Judah's the one that offers his own life for Joseph's life. Judah's the one. Judah has gone from relative background to the foreground of this mm-hmm. whole narrative. And so I think of all the people, Jacob is going to pick one of his sons. Well, why not Reuben? Why not Simeon? Why not Levi?
I think he's already ticked with Reuben and Simeon, because later on he's going to say, you're not, I'm disinheriting you basically from the firstborn anyway. So I think he's already turned to Judah as the de facto leader of the family at this point. And so, he's going to send Judah down to talk to Joseph. Plus, as they told the story, he may think, Joseph was real nice to Judah here. Maybe he'll give him some extra special stuff.
Yeah, could be.
But I do think it's interesting that they're going down to get directions to Goshen. Mm-hmm. And they stop at Goshen. Now, Pharaoh's the one who said, we'll give you the best of the land. Joseph is the one who said, I'm going to put you in Goshen. So apparently, we talked about what they talked about. Apparently part of it is, okay, we're going to put you all in Goshen because this is the best place for you to be. Because a lot of Egypt is not conducive for flocks.
Yeah. And I think
Goshen is.
I think there's a couple things going on with their placement. Number one, just you saying that just reminded me, so many times what Pharaoh said to them or Joseph or all this other stuff gets kind of jumbled between. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting to me that the sons don't tell their father, no, he said don't bring any of your stuff, you got to leave it. Either they left it out or he ignored it, one or the other.
One or the other. And both are possible.
Yeah, and they seem to have left a lot of stuff out before, so that seems very plausible.
Yeah.
But I think it's a specific choice too, that Joseph makes. Now, Joseph's completely integrated into Egypt. I mean, he's as much an Egyptian as anybody at this point, as far as Pharaoh or anyone else is concerned. But I think part of the reason Joseph wants them in Goshen is to keep them away from Egypt in terms of being, what's the word I want to use, assimilated into Egypt, or becoming part of the high court of Egypt, or being involved in that stuff. Because even though Joseph can handle it, he can only handle it because he started as a slave. He saw all God's provision for him to get him to the place of significance. Now he can handle being in that place. If Simeon and Levi walk in there and they hand them a scepter and a throne to sit on to tell who gets the grain,
different story.
So I think Joseph knows that they need to continue to be shepherds of flocks, and they need to be separated a little bit from that.
Plus, with everything that's gone on, Joseph still knows that the brother's relationship with God is nothing like his relationship with God. Because that's the only thing that kept Joseph going, was that he maintained that relationship. He didn't let it ruin him. He recognized, but I think he still realizes his brothers are going to need some help here. And so, he says, in Goshen, so that you'll be close to me, but maybe not too close to the rest of Egypt.
Yeah, because I really don't think they could handle the position that Joseph's in.
And then he specifically mentions, my brothers they're shepherds, which makes sure that the Egyptians aren't going to try to go in and assimilate them.
Correct. And again, I see a foreshadowing of Christ in a sense here, in that, look at Jesus' followers. Well, I want to be where I want to sit on your right, and I want to sit on your left. And he says, you don't even know the cup you're at. Oh, yes, I do. I'll drink that cup. They really couldn't. They don't even know
they sent their mother in.
Right.
Lord, would you give my two boys?
And then you look at Simon the sorcerer. He sees the power. Well, give me the power. I want the power. Well, you can't. You wouldn't even be able to handle it. I can tell just from the way you're. You know what I'm saying? So it's like Jesus could handle what Jesus could handle because he left everything behind to come and become what he was, to be a servant, to become like one of us. He left all that glory behind, so it's not going to go to his head. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And so Joseph the same way. If Joseph wouldn't have come about where he is the way he did, he probably, very much like his brothers, couldn't handle
and Jesus knows that even though the apostles are going to repent, this is starting to sound familiar. The apostles are going to repent. He knows there's still going to be some times in the future, even after they become the capital A apostles, that they're not going to do well. Peter, when those from James and Jerusalem come down, all of a sudden he backs off, doesn't have anything to do with Gentiles again. And so Jesus knows that just because you are doing your best to serve him, it doesn't necessarily mean that you've achieved the pinnacle. And I think Joseph feels the same way about his brothers. I think it's an excellent point. I think he wants to keep them away from the Egyptians.
Yeah, and he sees Pharaoh hooked him up with an Egyptian wife. I mean, all those with great power, there's also a lot of temptations in Egypt, but God prepared Joseph for that burden.
Yeah.
And so Goshen is where ultimately they'll end up, partially through the influence of Joseph, partially through the influence of Pharaoh, and mostly through the influence of God.
Yeah, and it's interesting. Later on, Goshen is going to be identified with Ramses.
Yes.
That's one of the cities that the Israelites built when they were slaves. What was given to them when they got down there, they have to work to make it better for the Egyptians.
That's right. Where are we at?
So,
29?
Halfway through 28. When they arrived in the region of Goshen, Joseph had his chariot made ready and went to Goshen to meet his father Israel. And as soon as Joseph appeared before him, he threw his arms around his father and wept for a long time. Now, there is a problem here. There is a little bit of interpretation going on in the NIV, because the Hebrew says that around him. As soon as Joseph appeared before him, he threw his arms around him and wept for a long time. Grammatically, that could be either Joseph or Jacob. And so, it could be both of them. But the NIV does a little bit of interpretation there. He threw his arms around his father means that Joseph's the one who did that. Yeah.
And again, this phrase is significant. It goes back to exactly what happens between Joseph and his brothers. And notice here that he falls on his neck and he weeps. But the thing that's missing when Jacob and Joseph are reunited, that was there when he was reunited with his brothers, is the kiss, right? And that has to do with that acceptance or that forgiveness that Joseph was extending to them. There's no forgiveness. Jacob didn't do anything, and Joseph didn't do anything to Jacob. So this is just complete being reunited as father and son.
Yeah, and Joseph knows that because, the brothers told him the story
Exactly.
about what happened.
Jacob had nothing to do
So
with
Jacob, he did not know this. As a matter of fact, he's been grieving since the day you left. So yeah, there's no need for forgiveness here. And then in verse 30, what I was talking about a few minutes ago, Israel said to Joseph, "Now I'm ready to die, since I have seen for myself that you are still alive." Interesting. Since I have seen for myself, your worthless brothers told me, but now that I've seen it for myself.
Yeah.
And then Joseph said to his brothers and to his father's household, "I will go up and speak to Pharaoh, and will say to him, my brothers and my father's household, who were living in the land of Canaan, have come to me. Now the men are shepherds, they tend livestock, and they have brought along their flocks and herds and everything they own." Interesting there, emphasis, shepherds, livestock, flocks, herds. Because, he says, verse 33, when Pharaoh calls you in and asks, "What is your occupation?" you should answer, "Your servants have tended livestock from our boyhood on, just as our fathers did, and then you'll be allowed to settle in the region of Goshen, for all shepherds are detestable to the Egyptians." So he's wanting to emphasize, and I think your point is exactly on target. He's trying to keep his family away from the Egyptians because he knows it would be so easy for them to slip into this. Because that's, he's heard the stories about Laban, and about how Jacob, slipped in there and pretty much starts taking over, and everybody has to leave. So yeah, he knows what could happen.
Well,
and so I think you're right. Keep them away. Keep the Egyptians out because, hey, did you hear? They're shepherds. Oh, stay away.
It's almost as if he's trying to, in addition to that, or to kind of build on that, he's trying maybe to keep Pharaoh away from giving him a bunch of stuff, because he says they brought everything, flocks, herds, sheep, and all that they have. In other words, they're good.
They're good.
Just let them live there, but they're good. They don't need anything. Because remember, Joseph extends certain courtesies to his family and gives them stuff, and then when Pharaoh gets involved, he's like, "Hey, take some wagons, take all this other stuff." He's trying to, because of his love for Joseph, or maybe that's not quite the right word, but because of the way he values Joseph and his administration.
I think he's looking for a way to help pay back Joseph.
Exactly.
You took care of my family, Egypt.
And to
I'm going to take care of yours.
You got to keep that guy happy because he saved your whole.
Exactly. Who knows what's about to happen after the next 4 years or so are up.
So Joseph may be seen.
Yeah,
right?
and I think again it goes back to what we've been saying about the family. The stuff they had, I'm sure, would be nice stuff, but it's nothing like what Pharaoh would give them.
No.
So let them continue to live the way they were. In the words of the immortal philosopher Ricky Skaggs, don't get above your raisin.
Well, and to go back to Deuteronomy 8, I don't know, it's just a great chapter, but to go back to Deuteronomy 8, God's point to them of the issue they're going to struggle with is having too much stuff. When you build for yourself houses and you're sleeping in your ivory bed you made, you got more money than you can spend, more food than you can eat. That's when you're going to be tempted to forget the Lord your God, right? Yeah. So maybe that's part of what Joseph's trying to prevent here. They have plenty. They don't need Pharaoh to give them even more stuff to become something that inhibits them. They sold their brother for 20 pieces of silver. These guys have a problem when it comes to, you know what I mean? So
stuff is a temptation for the whole family.
Sure.
When you look at the stories, it's all about the stuff. So, well, we're out of time again.
Good deal. Well, we made it through a whole chapter.
Again.
We're like new teachers now with this. COVID has cured us of going slow and steady.
But don't expect it when we get all
That's right.
together.
We'll start milking it again right away.
Yeah, absolutely.
But if you haven't, I think this has been a great text, a great class. Again, if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to us. We love being able to engage with you in the text. We wish there was a better way to do that.
Yeah. We do miss the questions that come out of our classes.
Yeah. So bring them on.
So help us out here.
Yeah.
Y'all have a great week.
Take care.